The post-World War II global order is completely dead. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has just severed the deepest, most integrated economic partnership on Earth, publicly declaring the United States an unreliable, broken ally. This is not just temporary political theatre designed to win points in the press. This is a calculated, devastating rupture that will directly drain your bank account, spike your daily energy bills, and alter your family's financial future forever. But what the media told you was a complete lie. The mainstream narrative claims this historic separation is simply a localized retaliation against the new 25% automotive tariffs imposed by Washington. The truth they are hiding is that these tariffs were merely a convenient excuse for Canada to execute a premeditated economic divorce that has been secretly engineered for years. Yet to understand the terrifying gravity of this crisis, we must answer one chilling question. What specific hidden trigger forced Mark Carney to pull the plug on an 80-year alliance overnight? A secret so devastating to the American economy that Washington is terrified you will find out. We will uncover that exact trigger by the end of this investigation. For now, you must understand the invisible, monumental forces actually driving this collapse. The public is being fed a completely sterilized, fabricated version of global events. To grasp why Ottawa just declared sovereign economic independence from its southern neighbour, you have to look 4,000 m away from the North American border. On March 16, 2025, immediately after taking power, Prime Minister Mark Carney broke a sacred long-standing geopolitical tradition. He completely bypassed the customary inaugural trip to Washington, an unwritten rule obeyed by every Canadian leader for decades. Instead, he flew directly across the Atlantic to Paris to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron inside the highly secure Élysée Palace. This was not a standard diplomatic greeting, nor was it a mere ceremonial photo opportunity. This was the first aggressive operational move in constructing a shadow economic bloc designed to systematically bypass American hegemony forever. Stop and ask yourself a serious question. Why would the leader of a nation that historically sends 75% of its massive export volume to the United States suddenly pivot to Europe within his first 72 hours in office? The data is incredibly clear, and it paints a grim picture for the American consumer. The comprehensive economic and trade agreement between Canada and the European Union had already boosted bilateral trade by an astounding 65% over 7 years. However, Carney realized that maintaining total reliance on an American market that routinely threatens punitive tariffs was a fatal vulnerability that had to be neutralized. Simultaneously, a second highly suppressed event was unfolding in the frozen expanse of the high north. The rapid melting of polar ice has violently opened up the Northwest Passage, transforming it into a shipping lane of incalculable geopolitical and commercial value. While the mainstream media deliberately distracted you with domestic political squabbles and theatre, Canada was quietly accelerating the icebreaker collaboration effort known as the Ice Pact. Partnering with Finland and key European defence contractors, Canada began building a formidable, heavily armed Arctic fleet. Washington was effectively compartmentalized and locked out of this emerging northern monopoly by hoarding control over the 21st century's most vital maritime trade route. Canada is methodically stripping away American leverage piece by piece. Did you honestly believe that your shipping costs are high right now just because of temporary transitional inflation? Think again, because the reality is much darker. When the United States loses uncontested free access to these newly vital Arctic shipping lanes, the cost of transporting consumer goods, advanced electronics, and raw materials spikes drastically and permanently. Every single time you check out at a local grocery store, you are already paying the invisible, heavy tax of America's shrinking global footprint. Yet there is a profound, incredibly lucrative silver lining for those who know how to read the macroeconomic board. This structural global realignment is birthing a highly resilient, heavily funded middle power coalition. In a historic, widely lauded address to the Australian Parliament on March 5, 2026, Carney explicitly outlined a radical new strategy for global survival. He declared that nations like Canada, Australia, Poland, and South Korea are currently forging a trusted, deeply integrated network to stabilize global supply chains, completely independent of Washington's influence. This means that while the decaying American industrial base faces severe isolation and volatile tariff wars, emerging markets within this new allied coalition are poised for unprecedented explosive economic growth. Astute institutional investors who understand this massive shift are already moving capital out of legacy American conglomerates and into these allied middle power sectors. You have a brief, rapidly closing window to align your own financial strategy with this rising tide of global wealth. But the third and most explosive connection lies in the unfolding violent chaos of the Middle East. The March 2026 strike escalations involving Iran and regional powers have thrown global oil markets into absolute unmitigated panic. Historically, the United States simply assumed it could infinitely rely on Canadian heavy crude to buffer domestic energy shocks and keep local gas prices artificially low. What no one is talking about is that over his first 26 trips abroad, Carney aggressively diversified Canada's energy export infrastructure entirely toward the Indo-Pacific and Europe. His administration formally recognized that tying their vast, immensely valuable natural resources to a volatile, unpredictable American foreign policy is nothing short of financial suicide. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find gas at $8 a gallon because your closest ally simply decided to sell their oil to Tokyo instead of Texas. That absolute nightmare is mathematically unfolding in real time right now. This decoupling is not just empty political rhetoric meant for the campaign trail. It is physical, geographical, and mathematically irreversible. The global supply chain pipes are literally being dug up and rerouted as we speak. And all of these sweeping structural shifts circle directly back to the massive unspoken trigger we mentioned in the very beginning. That hidden catalyst is the sole reason this extreme shocking divorce was authorized in the first place, and we will reveal it shortly. But before we expose that ultimate world-shaking secret, we must dissect the powerful individuals orchestrating this collapse from the shadows. The architects of this crisis have names, and their true documented motives will leave you terrified. This is not a traditional petty political dispute between two squabbling North American neighbors. This is a high-stakes, multi-trillion-dollar chess match orchestrated by the absolute apex predators of the global financial system. To comprehend the sheer scale and lethality of this threat, you must first look very closely at the man who initiated the rupture. Prime Minister Mark Carney is not a career politician who cares about poll numbers or public sentiment. He is a ruthless, highly calculating technocrat who previously served as the unparalleled governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. When he looks at the United States, he does not see a historic ally, a brother in arms, or a beacon of democracy. He views the entire American economy as a deeply distressed, incredibly toxic asset that must be aggressively liquidated from Canada's sovereign portfolio. In his infamous, widely circulated Davos address, he explicitly stated that nations cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit when integration becomes the very source of their subordination. That was not a casual philosophical musing for the global elite. That was a formal, chilling declaration of absolute economic warfare against Washington. On the other side of the global board sits the American administration wielding aggressive tariffs like a blunt, primitive instrument. When President Donald Trump announced a sudden draconian 25% tariff on car imports and auto parts on March 25, 2025, it was specifically designed to force Ottawa into immediate submission. The Pentagon, the U.S. Commerce Department, and deeply entrenched bureaucrats operated under the arrogant, fatal assumption that Canada had absolutely no other options. They foolishly believed their northern neighbor was geographically trapped and completely economically enslaved to the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. What if the greatest military and economic superpower in human history completely miscalculated its own leverage on the world stage? What if they threw a massive knockout punch and the intended target simply walked away from the fight entirely? The truth they are hiding is that Washington's aggressive, short-sighted protectionism completely backfired on a spectacular level. Instead of securing American manufacturing and bringing jobs home, it permanently alienated the entire industrialized globe. The United States demanded absolute, unquestioning loyalty, but offered nothing but severe economic punishment and instability in return. Now look at the silent, incredibly powerful giants entering the fray to capitalize on American weakness. The European Commission, led by a highly motivated Ursula von der Leyen, did not just verbally condemn the American tariffs. They actively mobilized a devastating €26 billion countermeasure protocol. The World Trade Organization is quietly watching from the sidelines as the foundational post-war rules of global commerce are violently torn to shreds. Brussels and Ottawa are now operating in absolute lockstep, seamlessly sharing classified economic intelligence and coordinating massive supply chain diversions. This means the United States is literally being boxed out of its own hemisphere by a highly sophisticated transatlantic coalition. For you, the everyday American consumer, this is a catastrophic, life-altering development that cannot be overstated. When global institutions actively intentionally coordinate to bypass the US dollar and avoid American shipping ports, the purchasing power of your hard-earned money simply evaporates. Your 401k, your life savings accounts, and your everyday purchasing ability are directly, inextricably tied to the global dominance of the American financial system. When that dominance fractures, your family's wealth bleeds out invisibly through skyrocketing inflation and relentless currency devaluation. You are being totally isolated on the world stage, and the economic walls are rapidly closing in on your standard of living. Yet, this unprecedented paradigm shift offers a rare, highly tactical advantage for those who are paying close attention to the board. The power players in Ottawa and Brussels are heavily telegraphing their next moves, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for institutional investors. By tracking the massive flow of institutional capital, we can see billions of dollars flooding into Canadian critical minerals, European defense manufacturing, and massive sovereign wealth funds operating entirely outside of US jurisdiction. Carney is actively aggressively subsidizing industries that adhere strictly to this new independent supply chain model. Did you know that following the quiet money trail of a former central banker is the single most accurate way to predict global market shifts? These elite financial architects never ever leave their own immense wealth exposed to the systemic risks they intentionally create. If you pivot your own financial strategy to directly mirror these global titans, you can shield your family's wealth from the impending American industrial crash. The exact blueprint for financial survival is actively being written right now by the very people engineering the collapse. But even these calculated, devastating maneuvers by the European Union and the Canadian Prime Minister pale in comparison to the hidden forces truly driving this agenda. Every single geopolitical maneuver we have just discussed is merely a surface-level symptom of a much deeper, far more terrifying systemic rot. Washington absolutely knows they have lost control of the board, and their desperate erratic policy shifts are glaring proof of their internal unspeakable panic. This brings us right back to the ultimate devastating secret that forced this entire historic crisis into motion in the first place. That specific, highly classified hidden trigger is the bedrock of this entire geopolitical conspiracy, and it is almost time to finally pull back the curtain on it. First, however, we must intimately examine the immediate localized destruction heading straight for your personal wallet. The theoretical high-level chess match is completely over, and the very real economic fallout is about to detonate right in your living room. This is exactly where the distant high-level geopolitical chess match bleeds directly into your personal bank account. When Mark Carney permanently and unapologetically ruptured the American partnership, he did not just sign a meaningless piece of diplomatic paper. He effectively and ruthlessly rewrote the total cost of your daily survival. The economic fallout from this unprecedented historic divorce is not some abstract distant theory debated by academics. It is a brutal mathematical certainty that is going to strike your household with devastating, unavoidable force. Let us start with the most immediate, terrifying threat: your basic ability to feed your own family in direct, calculated retaliation for Washington's aggressive 25% automotive tariffs. Canada has initiated catastrophic, globally felt countermeasures. They have strategically placed severe, crippling excise duties on essential commodity exports, most notably on the lifeblood of agriculture, potash. Canada is the world's undisputed leading producer of potash, a completely non-negotiable foundational ingredient for commercial agricultural fertilizer. When the wholesale cost of Canadian potash doubles overnight, American farmers are violently forced to pass that massive expense directly onto the consumer. The World Bank has already flagged global fertilizer shortages as a primary terrifying driver of acute food insecurity and systemic famine. We are not talking about paying a few extra cents for a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. We are looking at a heavily projected, undeniable 20 to 30% spike in basic grocery staples across the United States within the very next harvest cycle. Walk into your kitchen right now, open your pantry, and look closely at your shelves. Imagine having to pay exactly double for every single item in that room by this time next year. Ask yourself honestly, How long can your current stagnant paycheck sustain that brutal new reality? Furthermore, the retaliation extends deep into the highly sensitive, totally critical energy sector. Canada reliably supplies over 4 million barrels of heavy crude oil to the United States every single uninterrupted day. By imposing draconian export duties on this absolutely vital energy pipeline, Ottawa is artificially and intentionally constricting American domestic supply. Your monthly energy bills are about to skyrocket to unprecedented levels, and the cost to simply fill your gas tank will reach heights that will entirely the working class. The economic devastation, however, absolutely does not stop at just food and fuel. The entire American housing market is currently walking blindfolded straight into an industrial buzzsaw. Canada is the absolute largest foreign supplier of softwood lumber to the United States, representing a total necessity for basic home construction, with new, highly punitive retaliatory tariffs slamming the crossbar lumber industry. The base cost to build a standard single-family home is projected to surge by tens of thousands of dollars. This dynamic will inevitably and permanently freeze new residential construction, violently drive up existing home prices, and lock millions of young American families out of the housing market forever. What the politicians told you on television was a complete and utter lie. They loudly claimed these tariffs would protect domestic workers, but absolutely no one mentioned that it would permanently destroy the American dream of home ownership in the process. Meanwhile, the raw, unfiltered data from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business reveals a stark, deeply concerning reality for the United States. Over 68% of Canadian small business owners reported immediate negative impacts from the initial onset of the trade war. Yet instead of surrendering to Washington's demands, they are rapidly aggressively adapting to the New World Order. They are actively forging entirely new, highly lucrative supply chains with massive Asian and European markets, leaving traditional American buyers stranded without crucial inventory. Cross-border commercial flight bookings between the United States and Canada have plummeted by an astonishing, unprecedented 70%. This signals a total catastrophic freeze in corporate expansion and bilateral business development that will take decades to repair. There is, however, a critical, highly effective strategy to protect yourself from this impending inflationary inferno. While the traditional uninformed American consumer will be mercilessly crushed under the immense weight of these rising costs, educated individuals can strategically hedge their exposure. By diversifying your personal investments into hard, tangible assets, vital commodities, and international index funds that track the rapidly expanding European and Indo-Pacific markets, you can effectively bypass the domestic crash entirely. The global wealth isn't magically disappearing. It is simply quietly migrating across the ocean to more stable jurisdictions. If you intelligently position your portfolio to capture the immense growth of Canada's new global trade agreements, you can turn this domestic crisis into a generational wealth-building opportunity. But you must act with extreme urgency, because the window for preparation is closing far faster than anyone in power dares to admit. The economic data is flashing bright red across every single major financial terminal on Wall Street. The critical supply chain bottlenecks are already beginning to severely choke major American ports from coast to coast. The immediate cost of living increases we are seeing are just the opening mild salvo in a much larger, far more destructive global economic war, and this rapidly escalating financial pain is intricately directly linked to the master secret we have been relentlessly tracking from the very beginning. The ultimate, highly classified trigger that sparked this entire catastrophe is the single missing piece of the complex puzzle. We are finally absolutely ready to expose it to the light of day. But before we reveal the chilling, undeniable truth behind Carney's decision, we must project exactly what will happen next. You desperately need a survival timeline, and the next 30 days are going to be absolutely critical to your family's future. The strict timeline for this massive economic unraveling is absolutely not measured in years. It is measured in mere weeks. Based on the very latest macroeconomic indicators and the highly aggressive diplomatic posturing from Ottawa, we have compiled a highly precise data-backed forecast for the next 30 days. This is exactly step by step what you must prepare for to survive the coming storm. In week 1, there is a heavily calculated 85% probability that the United States Commerce Department will panic. They will likely attempt to heavily artificially subsidize domestic agricultural producers to offset the staggering, crippling cost of Canadian potash. However, This desperate reactionary money printing will only violently accelerate core inflation, immediately driving up the cost of all consumer goods. Watch the global bond markets incredibly closely during this first week, as yields will absolutely spike in anticipation of a prolonged, devastating trade war. You will begin to see severe localized shortages of specialized imported items in your local supermarkets before the end of the seventh day. Moving swiftly into week 2, the harsh, undeniable reality of the massive supply chain rupture will squarely hit the American retail sector. We assign a highly confident 90% probability to major American auto manufacturers officially announcing emergency indefinite production halts. This total freeze will be directly caused by the inability to source components due to the 25% tariff on cross-border auto parts. Dealership lots will completely empty out, and the price of basic used vehicles will instantly surge to unprecedented absolute crisis-level highs. Are you fully prepared to lose your sole source of income because your company cannot source the basic raw materials it needs to operate? That is the exact terrifying scenario actively playing out in the American Rust Belt right at this very moment. Simultaneously, the entire domestic housing market will violently stall as the total lack of Canadian softwood lumber halts new framing projects across the entire Sun Belt. By week 3, the calculated energy retaliation from the north will fully, devastatingly materialize for the everyday citizen. There is a solid 70% probability that the baseline cost of gasoline will violently increase by at least 40 to 50 cents per gallon nationwide. This massive price shock will be directly, undeniably triggered by Canada's severe excise taxes on their heavy crude exports. Major transportation and global logistics companies will have absolutely no choice but to immediately pass these massive fuel surcharges directly onto you, the final consumer. Finally, as we enter the critical window of week 4, we will witness a historic, irreversible geopolitical fracturing of the global order. There is a near certain 95% probability that the European Union will formally announce a fast-tracked, highly exclusive zero-tariff critical minerals pact with Canada. This massive agreement will entirely intentionally bypass the United States and its deteriorating industrial base. This strategic move will be the absolute death knell for American dominance in the highly lucrative next-generation tech and electric vehicle sectors. The global center of economic gravity will officially permanently shift away from Washington and toward this newly formed middle power coalition. But if you have wisely diversified your assets and fully prepared your household stockpiles during the first 3 chaotic weeks, you will be heavily insulated from this climactic blast. The clock is rapidly ticking down, and blissful ignorance is absolutely no longer a valid excuse for inaction. You have exactly 1 month to completely secure your financial perimeter before the economic blast wave hits your community. All of these rapidly accelerating events, all of this terrifying mathematical certainty leads us directly, inevitably, to the final revelation. We have meticulously tracked the hidden connections, boldly exposed the elite power players, and accurately mapped the devastating economic fallout. Now it is finally time to answer the burning question that ties this entire global nightmare together. It is time to reveal the ultimate highly classified trigger that destroyed the world as we know it. We finally arrive at the ultimate suppressed master secret that changes absolutely everything. What was the exact highly hidden trigger that forcefully compelled Mark Carney to permanently sever ties with the United States? It was the deeply classified, terrifying realization of the debt-to-dominance death spiral. Highly confidential internal intelligence models recently provided to Ottawa decisively proved that the United States national debt has finally crossed an irreversible mathematical threshold. Washington can absolutely no longer guarantee the security of foreign supply chains without hyperinflating the dollar into total oblivion. Carney didn't pull the plug because of fleeting political anger or petty diplomatic disagreements. He pulled it because the cold, hard math proved the American empire is fiscally terminal. Remaining economically attached to a sinking superpower meant that Canada would inevitably tragically drown with it. This is the true horrifying cost of the events unfolding right now. The long era of American exceptionalism, artificially subsidizing your cheap goods, low gas prices, and stable financial markets, is permanently, undeniably dead. It has been ruthlessly replaced by a harsh multipolar world where your family's wealth is actively, intentionally being targeted for global extraction. You now clearly understand how the Canadian potash and lumber tariffs we discussed earlier are specifically designed to break the back of the American consumer. But this visible, heavily publicized trade war is just a convenient cover for a much larger, infinitely more dangerous currency collapse happening right now in the shadows. The absolute next video you must watch is about the BRICS Alliance's highly secret global gold accumulation strategy. What happens in that investigation will make every single terrifying event in this video make perfect sense. Click the video on your screen right now before the establishment forces this truth to be taken down forever.